Now to Horizon asks who will be the master and who will be the slaves in a future dominated by super-intelligent machines. Better mind the computer.
Have almost no communication with super-intelligent computers because the nature of what they're thinking about will be completely foreign to us. I thought of it as an example, two machines, maybe each the size of a desk, next to each other, communicating with each other. I've thought of one maybe as George and the other as Sam, and they're talking to each other, and you walk up and you say, "Hey, George, what are you talking about?" Well, from the time you started knocking until you finished asking your question, George has already said to Sam more words than all the utterances of all the humans that ever lived. So the question is, well, what would it say to you?
This is how the computer sees the human brain, the intelligent machine that enabled our ancient ancestors to survive in their brutally dangerous world. The brain's rate of evolution is extremely slow, although its intelligence has stretched to its limits to produce some incredible achievements.
Baby salute. Off the ground, up the floor. There we go.
By contrast, the dangers of the world have begun to evolve explosively fast. The human brain may not be intelligent enough to cope for much longer unaided. This is how the human brain sees the computer. The computer's a calculating machine whose rate of evolution is immeasurably more rapid than the brain's. Born less than 40 years ago, the computer has already developed from a cumbersome machine driven by valves through 4 evolutionary generations. Valves to transistors. Transistors to microcircuits. Microcircuits to integrated circuits. Each generation becoming more compact and far more powerful. The 1980s have already seen a tremendous acceleration in computer development. Now, an international race is on to make computers not only more powerful, but highly intelligent. The Japanese have a government-sponsored crash program to develop a 5th generation of computers. They expect this 5th generation to help them solve ever more complex, multifaceted social problems, including, but not limited to, transition to an elderly society. Never before has a computer attempted anything so profound. We seem to be witnessing the spawning of a new kind of intelligence, artificial intelligence. Already, many computers are behaving like infant prodigies. What will they do when they grow up? Faced with such a rapid rate of evolution, it would be reckless for us to make any predictions. But it would be madness not to try. Fortunately, the frontiers of research in artificial intelligence are manned by computer scientists who are more than ready to forecast the impact of their work on human society. First, Professor Edward Fredkin.
I think that the artificial intelligences of the future will be worried about weighty problems that we simply can't understand, and they may condescend to talk to us. They may amuse us on occasion or play games that we like to play, and in some sense, they might keep us as pets.
Another scientist in artificial intelligence is Professor Joe Weizenbaum.
It has been said, especially here at MIT, that computers will take over in some sense, and it's even been said that if we're lucky, they'll keep us as pets. Arthur C. Clarke, the science fiction writer, remarked once that if that were to happen, it would serve us right. He said. The question I have about that is who are these us who it would serve right? You have to recall that there are, to be very, very generous, say 1,000 people in the whole world who are working on these things, and without having asked anyone else. And if it turns out if they produce the monstrosities that are being forecast here, then it'll serve us right, all the rest of us. I think this says something about the whole question of responsibility in science.
Responsibility in science or science fiction? If we're not to be blown off course by wild-sounding predictions, we'd better anchor ourselves in familiar waters. 1959, and the first time computers impacted on society was when Northwest Gas used one to issue their gas bills. Soon, all the public utilities followed. Like babies learning to walk, computers fell over themselves again and again. Artificial intelligence, computers were obviously idiots, certainly no match for their human masters. We don't see things like that anymore. Now we rely on computers in every walk of life, and even school children carry around calculating power that would once have filled a room. Today, computers do everything for us, from flying aircraft to playing games. By contrast, work in artificial intelligence is virtually invisible. It's all a matter of computer programs. But computer programs are gobbledygook to anyone but the specialist, and like the human brain, the computer is an inscrutable machine. From the outside, it's downright boring. A video display unit is a video display unit, and a computer is a shiny tin can. We can only keep watch on what's going on inside through talking to the people who work with them.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Dr. Myers. The nurse tells me that you feel quite weak.
Dr. Jack Myers is a consultant with the University School of Medicine, Pittsburgh.
Well, diagnosis is often the most difficult part of medicine. It's getting more difficult because of the vast extent of medical knowledge and the number of diagnostic possibilities that must be entertained. So about a decade ago, we arrived at the idea that the computer, with its almost infinite memory and ability to correlate many things simultaneously, would be a help as a diagnostic consultant. We have about 600 diseases profiled now, and each has about 125 manifestations, and then we have to put several values on each of those. I made a rough calculation the other day that an internist, if he's to contain this medical knowledge base, which we have, would have to know 225,000 facts. In my own computer up here, I don't retain 25% of that information. So I don't have to make any personal apology. Why not put it into the computer and use it appropriately?
The program has put together a number of diagnostic possibilities to account for the...
Harry Popel, one of a new breed of computer specialists known as knowledge engineers. He's spent 10 years painstakingly analyzing Jack Myers' lifetime of experience and putting it into a computer program. And not just Dr. Myers' experience. The computer has digested a whole medical library and the most up-to-date medical journals. Harry starts by feeding in all the information Jack has gleaned from the patient. Already there's some confusion. The patient's symptoms seem to be contradictory.
Harry, we're doing this computer consultation because this is a problem case. As you can see here, there's some changes in kidney function.
The computer, however, doesn't see it as a problem case. It swiftly scans through all the patient's symptoms. Then it finds out which combination of most symptoms corresponds best with anything in the libraries of medical practice it's been programmed with. That's a lot of computer processing. But in a matter of seconds, the program arrives at a diagnosis with a sureness that would be beyond one single consultant.
Well, I wouldn't be sure, but the system says it's sarcoid. It doesn't have any trouble. It's said, well, you know, I'm sure it said internally it would be nice to have the big liver, the big spleen, and the big lymph nodes, but this combination of evidence is just so strong that...
So even though some of the classical symptoms a doctor would look for were absent, the computer correctly diagnosed the patient's disease as sarcoidosis. But what about the contradictory symptoms that didn't fit?
Now the system wants to know about the patient's blood pressure. We have to equivocate...
And so the computer program puts out feelers to the outside world to get the extra information it needs to find what else the patient is suffering from. Watching the interchange, it's easy to form the impression that the computer program is intelligent. But is it? The computer it's being run on is 2,578 miles away at one of the citadels of artificial intelligence, Stanford University. Head of the computing department is Professor Edward Feigenbaum. Is the Pittsburgh computer program really intelligent? Feigenbaum's pragmatic about it.
What I observe is that one can make a program perform extremely, quote, intelligently, unquote, by standards of human performance at the level of PhDs, MDs, expert practitioners in fields, people with many years of experience, by giving those programs considerable bodies of knowledge about the field in which the endeavor is taking place. And so I label that behavior intelligent behavior.
A terse summary of a philosophy that's given birth to a brand new industry sweeping across the USA, from here in Pittsburgh to the Pacific coast. The knowledge-based expert systems industry. For example, hard at work at Stanford Research International is one of America's top geological prospecting consultants. This particular prospector recently struck it rich.
On the basis of the information you gave me, I would consider the possibility of a porphyric upper deposit of type A. Which of those hypotheses...
Again, the expert consultant is not the man, it's the computer program. The program's called Prospector. Its expertise is based on a huge fund of geological knowledge that's been built into it. Now the program's asking for some more information about a possible mining site.
To what degree do you believe that the target area is in the continental margin mobile belt? Now, what the hell is it asking me about that for? I ask why?
Dr. Ribot can't follow the computer's line of reasoning.
I'm trying to establish the petrotectonic setting.
Fortunately, Prospect has been programmed to explain its thinking. This is no gimmick, it's a matter of trust.
No human professional will look to a machine for assistance in human professional work unless that expert can understand how the machine has been going through its reasoning. Black boxes won't sell. Inscrutable devices won't sell.
Feigenbaum's responding to the challenge often levelled at knowledge-based expert systems. Prospectors digested tomes of theoretical geology. Here it's being fed practical information from maps of actual prospecting sites. The program now knows more than any single living consultant. But can it take that intuitive leap that's the hallmark of the human expert? Well, Prospector does better than that. It converts the art of expert guessing to sheer mechanical logic. And at Mount Tolman, this new brand of expertise finally paid off. Prospecting data gathered from this possible mining site in Washington state was handed over to the computer to analyze. Prospector confirmed they'd probably find molybdenum there, a valuable mineral. They did, $100 million worth, bang in the center of Prospector's final map. Expert systems are now in demand in scores of applications because they make the know-how of whole teams of experts instantly available.
Which is inappropriate here.
But does that make them intelligent? Head of the department that produced Prospector, Professor Niels Nielsen.
There's this saying about computers that garbage in, garbage out, that you can't get more out of a computer than you put in. And that's probably quite true. However, the consequences that people like to draw from that are sometimes a bit misleading. I think it's better to say something like pearls in, pearls out. And what we're exploring really in artificial intelligence are techniques for putting those pearls in. We can, in fact, say quite a bit to a computer. And it's in saying quite a bit to a computer that we get a computer to perform intelligently.
At the University of California, Professor James Meehan is one who's said quite a bit to his computer, and the computer has said quite a bit back. In fact, it started right, not least the rules of English. At IBM's Yorktown Heights Research Center, New York State, Dr. Lance Miller.
I'd like to tell you about our IBM epistle system. The best way to describe what it's for is to imagine all the busy offices in the world, and all of a sudden, on cue, their secretaries disappear. The principal, the manager, is left with no one to help him. What could we provide for him? What kind of computer assistance could we provide? Certainly, in the area of text, we could provide a great deal of assistance.
The first thing Epistle sorts out is your spelling. There's the old I before E except after C mistake, but you might not have meant received at all, so the program checks on that first. Having corrected your spelling, Epistle goes on to improve your grammar. Neither in the box or with the packing rather than nor is a slip that would really let the IBM side down. The computer program points out the error, and tells the person who wrote the letter how to put it right.
The thing about spelling and grammar is they're either right or wrong. But your letter, of course, is not going to be effective if it doesn't have the right tone, doesn't have the right style. Much more difficult to do, but I'll show you. Even that we have in the computer.
So Epistle checks every phrase against its built-in rules of good style and decides the tone of absolutely essential sounds arrogant. In any case, the word absolutely is unnecessary. It feels just like being guided by a first-class English teacher. But is Epistle worthy of the term artificial intelligence? Does it understand what it's doing in the sense that we do? It's easy to leap to false conclusions, as Professor Weizenbaum discovered when he created ELIZA. ELIZA is a computer program that anyone can converse with via the keyboard, and it'll reply on the screen. We've added human speech to make the conversation more clear.
Men are all alike.
In what way?
They're always bugging us about something or other.
Can you think of a specific example?
Well, my boyfriend made me come here.
Your boyfriend made you come here?
He says I'm depressed much of the time.
I'm sorry to hear that you're depressed.
It's true. I am unhappy.
Do you think coming here will help you not to be unhappy?
The computer's replies seem very understanding, but this program is merely triggered by certain phrases to come out with stock responses. Nevertheless, Weizenbaum's secretary fell under the spell of the machine.
When I asked her to my office and sat her down at the keyboard, and she began to type, and of course I looked over her shoulder to make sure that everything was operating properly. After 2 or 3 interchanges with the machine, she turned to me and she said, "Would you mind leaving the room, please?"
And yet she knew, as Weizenbaum did, that ELIZA didn't understand a single word that was being typed into it.
You're like my father in some ways. You don't argue with me.
Why do you think I don't argue with you?
You're afraid of me.
Does it please you to think I'm afraid of you?
My father's afraid of everybody.
The problem of giving a computer genuine understanding, common sense if you like, is a deep one. Professor Nielsen.
In artificial intelligence, we've been concerned really with 2 major kinds of systems. One could be called expert systems. The other might be really called naive systems. However, all of us, even those who never go to high school or to graduate school, are experts in very many fields having to do with life. We learn a lot as human beings without really ever being aware that we're learning these things. We learn things about our culture. We learn lots of things about how the world works. We learn that when we pull the plug on the bathtub drain, the water goes out. Many things of that sort. So one could consider attempting to build an expert system with that kind of knowledge in it. Such an expert system, we would call it a naive system because it has a lot of knowledge that all of us learn automatically, would in fact then be able to perform something that we call common sense reasoning. This particular task is one that's probably has been a lot more difficult for us than the task of building expert systems.
One who has not been afraid to tackle the task is Professor Gerald de Jong of the University of Illinois. His computer program is called FRUMP, for Fast Reading, Understanding and Memory Program. It's designed to understand news stories and summarize them. FRUMP doesn't deal with individual words and grammar alone. It pays special attention to concepts. Take a specific example.
John sold Bill a book. We put that in the computer, and then we can ask it, who sold Bill a book? And the system should be able to respond with John. But if we ask it instead, who bought a book, the system won't be able to understand because it doesn't know the relationship of the word bought to the word sold. If instead we give the computer the concept of ownership, then not only will it understand bought and sold, but also receiving a birthday present, home mortgages, being miserly, borrowing and selling, and so on. Now, of course, this means we have to give a phenomenal amount of information to the computer about ownership. But in fact, we can do that. There are no theoretically insurmountable problems.
The idea of a computer being able to handle concepts is amazing enough. Yet FRUMP's also been taught about the world in general. So now it can look at a news story for a fraction of a second and come up with a sensible summary. Not only that, but because FRUMP deals with concepts, which are more international than words, it's equally happy to deliver its summary in French or Chinese or Spanish as well as English. Meanwhile, armed with a knowledge base in the manner of an expert system, a comprehensive grammar like epistle, and a fair knowledge of the world in general like frump, and Professor Meehan's tailspin program's grown into a veritable Enid Blyton. Tell it things like, it's kind to help people in trouble, give it a couple of characters, and it'll write you a fable. So are you sitting comfortably? Then we'll begin.
Once upon a time, George Ant lived near a patch of ground.
There was a nest in an ash tree. Wilma Bird lived in the nest. There was some water in a river. Wilma knew that the water was in the river.
George knew that the water was in the river.
One day, Wilma was very thirsty. Wilma wanted to get near some water. Wilma flew from her nest across a meadow, through a valley to the river. Wilma drank the water. Wilma wasn't thirsty anymore.
George was very thirsty. George wanted to get near some water. George walked from his patch of ground, across the meadow, through the valley, to a river bank. George fell into the water. George wanted to get near the valley. George couldn't get near the valley. George wanted to get near the meadow. George couldn't get near the meadow.
Wilma wanted George to get near the meadow. Wilma wanted to get near George. Wilma grabbed George with her claw. Wilma took George from the river, through the valley to the meadow.
George was devoted to Wilma. George owed everything to Wilma. The end.
Well, not a Pulitzer Prize winner yet, but how good a story could you write when you were as young as this? There was a time when you had to tell a computer how to do everything. But here at the University of Illinois, one computer program devised by Professor Michalski is encouraged to work out its own rules for procedure. The results have been dramatic. Barry Jacobson's speciality is in one of Illinois' major crops, soybeans. In 1 year, Illinois can lose up to 20% of its 10 million acre crop because of 30 different diseases that go undiagnosed. So Michalski fed Jacobson's rules for diagnosis into a computer, gave it 300 case histories to diagnose, and it achieved an 82% success rate, which was very good.
However, we then took 376 cases, put these into the computer, and allowed the computer to develop its own diagnostic rules. After some massaging of the computer-derived rules, we achieved a 98.6% success ratio in the diagnosis of soybean diseases.
Not to put too fine a point on it, the disease diagnosis computer program is more expert than the human being whose brain was picked to create it. Does Professor Jacobson feel upstaged? Not at all.
The problem is that there are just too few competent diagnosticians. With the use of the computer consultant for soybean disease diagnosis, farmers can be as expert a diagnostician as I am, virtually 24 hours a day.
The impact of artificial intelligence on society, on the world, I think is going to be rather profound. There will be some dramatic impacts, say, in employment. The kinds of jobs that up to now only humans can perform, that involve intellectual effort, perhaps some clerical effort, work by experts, in fact are going to be at least aided by machines, and so probably there will be less of a need, I think, for humans to be performing those kinds of tasks. This presents society with some very interesting questions as to how it utilizes human beings and how it compensates human beings.
I think the opposite is really the case, because it's the whole...
Dr. Lou Robinson, IBM's Director of Liaison with the universities.
When we, as a society, invent devices like steam shovels that help us do large construction projects like build canals, we don't feel that we've denied ourselves the opportunity for labor. In the same sense, computing machines are designed to help us relieve ourselves of certain intellectual kinds of activities that are burdensome, tedious, repetitive, or even difficult or impossible to do because of the volumes of data involved that suddenly we can do with machines and very effectively. I think what it creates is a challenge to creativity, a challenge to think of new things to do, of new ways to apply these machines. And that's the view that I hold about artificial intelligence in general.
It's obviously a gamble whether or not artificial intelligence will have the same effect on employment as automation. Robots like this one can weld a car body more efficiently than humans. Nevertheless, up to now, they've been what Professor Donald Mickey of the Machine Intelligence Research Unit at Edinburgh calls dim robots.
Well, dim robots are the robots we have on the factory floor today in all the advanced countries. They're blind and dumb, they don't understand their surroundings. And the other kind of robot, which will dominate the technology of the late 1980s in automation, and also is of acute interest to experimental artificial intelligence scientists, is the kind of robot where the human can convey to its machine assistants his own concepts, suggested strategies, and the machine, the robot, can understand him. But no machine can accept and utilize concepts from a person unless he has some kind of window on the same world that the person sees. And therefore, to be an intelligent robot, to a useful degree, as an intelligent and understanding assistant, robots are going to have artificial eyes, artificial ears, artificial sense of touch. It's just essential.
And indeed, they're being given these senses already. That same robot has now been given enough visual sense for it to avoid knocking Snoopy off his perch. But it's banged its elbow, so it assesses the situation with its TV eye and takes avoiding action and steers around Snoopy another way. A dim car-welding robot wouldn't even know Snoopy was there. Now, a computer that could see things for itself would represent a quantum jump in artificial intelligence. Professor Igor Alexander at Brunel University in England has connected a TV camera to a computer and taught it to recognize faces.
Hello, Bruce. Hello, John. Intruder. Intruder.
The computer immediately spots the odd man out. The security applications are obvious, but how does the computer manage to recognize such a variable pattern as a human face? The answer is a direct crib from the human brain. It's wired up as an artificial neural network with a maze of interconnections.
Hello.
This neural network enables the computer to take an intelligent guess at the identity of the face it's looking at.
Hello.
Even changing your expression doesn't put it off. On the contrary, the computer responds accordingly.
Hello, Igor. Hello, Igor. Hello, Igor. Hello, Igor.
The same program can read words, and not just words written in computer code. Signatures, for example. Could this be a way to speed up the rate at which computers can learn? We asked Professor Alexander if his computer could be developed to read, say, Encyclopedia Britannica.
Reading is no problem at all. It's extracting meaning from what's being read that is difficult. That's our project for the moment. In this laboratory, we're developing an artificial neural network which we hope very soon will do just that.
Computers seem set to learn at a rate which far outstrips our speed of learning. They may even understand what they learn. But the hallmark of human intelligence is the eureka effect. Will computers be able to come up with anything new?
Well, we might also ask, can a human generate anything new? I think human beings are excellent at being able to put ideas together and come up with something that appears new. I think in the same sense, computers will be able to analyze ideas that they already have, put them together in novel ways that will produce something quite dramatically new.
As an illustration, back at Stanford University, Professor Doug Lennart describes his computer program.
The research I'm currently involved in is the building of a program called Eurisco. Eurisco's task is to discover new knowledge. It does a kind of open-ended theory formation, almost like scientists carrying out research. Eurisco was started out with a set of about 100 very simple math concepts dealing with sets and functions. And after about an hour of running, the program discovered the notion of counting, natural numbers, and very quickly applied some more rules of thumb that it has to generate the notions we think of as arithmetic and elementary number theory. It eventually went on into geometry and rediscovered a lot of Euclid's theorems.
The most dramatic new knowledge Doug Lennert's program has generated seems at first sight merely incestuous. The brain power of a computer resides here, in thousands of tiny transistors etched onto a flat sheet of silicon the size of a tea leaf. Planning the internal connections for these minute components is a nightmare, and computers already help. Professor Lennert's program has come up with previously unimaginable three-dimensional chip designs that will make future computers far more powerful. Computer intelligence seems set to pull itself up by its own bootstraps. If ever intelligent computers learn to design super-intelligent computers, how will we get on with them? Professor Edward Fredkin has been a key figure at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology since artificial intelligence research began. He's also a highly successful businessman.
As these machines evolve, and as some intelligent machines design others, and they get to be smarter and smarter, it gets to be fairly difficult to imagine how you can have a machine that's millions of times smarter than the smartest person, and yet is really our slave doing what we want. Now, we've been training chimpanzees to talk in sign language, and of course a lot of progress has been made there. But if we ever get a chimpanzee that can really communicate, and we tried to talk to him, what we'd find is that he's interested in talking about things like where can he find a banana, and will you tickle me, or playing games that chimpanzees like to play. But if you want to talk to them about nuclear disarmament and who's going to be elected president, they simply won't be interested. And on the other hand, we would be very little interested in discussing for long what a chimpanzee has on its mind. Likewise, I think that the artificial intelligences of the future will be worried about weighty problems that we simply can't understand, and they may condescend to talk to us. They may amuse us on occasion or play games that we like to play, and in some sense, they might keep us as pets. I think that what that means really is they might solve some problems for us, like curing certain diseases. They might find it necessary to take some of our toys away, some of our hydrogen bombs and things, but there's no reason that they would want to go after the same things we want, because they won't be interested in them.
I once owned a Porsche, a very high-powered sports car. I have nothing against high-powered sports cars. I don't want to get along without technology and so on. I much enjoy driving it. But I wouldn't have let, say, any old 14-year-old boy drive the car. A Porsche in those hands is a dangerous instrument. I think the state of moral wisdom, say, of our society is such that it is at best a 14-year-old boy, perhaps an 11-year-old boy. And under those circumstances, the very, very powerful tools that we're making, and I'm thinking particularly of computers, I think have to be looked at as at least potentially very dangerous instruments.
Evidently, artificial intelligence means different things to different people. Like the elephant and the three blind men, one feels it to be a beast of burden to help us increase production. One fears it to be a dangerous serpent. One thinks of it as a rope flung to rescue mankind in trouble. But what does the elephant think? Indeed, can a machine ever be said to think at all? Professor Mickey.
Well, I would say that it's not so much a matter of whether a machine can think or not, which is how you prefer to use words, but rather whether they can think in a sufficiently human-like way for people to have useful communication with them. It's rather the same as arguing whether a boat can swim. Now, naval people will say, no, of course not, it sails. And what they mean is it doesn't make movements like a fish. On the other hand, the aero engineers have settled for a word like fly, and they say, yes, a bird flies, and so does an aeroplane. So that's really arguing about words.
I have read in the literature many times the view that the human mind is an ultra-fantastic thing, and we get along in ordinary life using 5 or 10% of its capacity, and if we could only unleash the other 90%, we'd all be Superman. My opinion really is that just to get along in society takes maybe 110% of the capacity of a human mind, and as a result, many people are overloaded by just life, trying to get along in a very difficult world, and they get mentally ill, they get unhappy, and so on. and that we don't really have the capacity, the mental capacity, to manage complicated affairs like how should Russia and the United States get along in this world so that we don't drop thermonuclear bombs on each other. That's a question that may be too hard for us to deal with, and we may revert to the primitive passions that end up causing war just because we don't really have the mental capacity to solve these very hard problems and all the other things we have to do.
But if you get down to reality, what is important is whether you can program computers so that they can think and learn in a sufficiently human-like way to be really useful assistants and companions.
We've seen how computers can already communicate in written words that suit human beings. Getting intelligent machines to understand the spoken word is proving a tougher nut to crack.
Left, 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 down, down.
This robot arm at the Machine Intelligence Research Unit at Edinburgh is learning to respond to vocal instructions.
Right, right, right.
It's important to realize that in a sense the machine is learning this trick for our benefit. Today's intelligent robots tend to be more efficient if they work things out for themselves. This IBM robot at Yorktown Heights can draw a map of Japan. Big deal. But if you put in a smaller piece of paper, the system spots the change immediately and makes all the internal adjustments necessary to cope with the new problem. Marry the advances in intelligent robots to the evolution of intelligent computers, and the possibilities seem almost limitless.
There's absolutely no principle of science or even engineering or practicality that gives any hint as to why we would run into some limitation. It's clear that computers will be able to have enough memory. It's clear they'll be able to do enough processing. It's clear that in every physical way, the computer will be sufficient. The only thing that stands between us and having intelligent systems is one thing. There's a few things we don't know how to do, and we're making progress. And whether that progress will continue to come slowly over years and decades, I don't know.
But early in 1982, an announcement was made of a project that could catapult Professor Fredkin's projections much nearer than he expected. A team of Japanese computer scientists had visited all the major research centers for artificial intelligence in the USA, making careful notes. Then they went back home and launched a massive fifth-generation computer development program of their own. Head of MIT's Computer Science Laboratories, Professor Michael Detouzos.
I found out about the fifth-generation computer project for the first time from one of my faculty, who had gone to Japan, learned about it, came back and spoke to us, describing its aims. The aims of the fifth-generation computer project are to construct machines and software that will understand spoken language in French, English, Japanese, whatever, that will translate language from one such language, such as Japanese, to another, such as English, and that will make possible expert systems, systems that can answer questions about law, about medicine, about finance, in effect, leading toward progressive automation of the service sector of the economy. I found myself and several of my colleagues in shock when we heard about it. The reason was that in that plan, we discerned pretty much, I would say 80%, of the research charter of our own laboratory, a laboratory that is aimed at researching the future 10, 15 years out.
This is not just academic pique. Co-founder of NASA's Goddard Space Research Institute, Professor Robert Jastrow, explains.
The whole idea, the idea of building a quasi-human brain was in the province of the universities and the theorists, but it's suddenly become vital because the Japanese are trying to gain control of the world's computing industry from the United States. And you must remember that's a $200 billion a year business, or soon will be, within 3 years. And that makes it the biggest business in the world next to petroleum.
Look at it from Japan's point of view. They have no natural resources to speak of, and the information revolution needs no natural resources. Bits cannot be depleted. They have an electronics infrastructure. They're competing very successfully with us in that sector. So they can rest on it and build the information revolution on it. What more natural for them than to go after it? Now, whoever controls the information revolution is very much in the same position as whoever controlled the Industrial Revolution. In effect, think of what England and the United States had by way of control in the industrial era. And you have a picture of what Japan might have if it succeeds in the information era.
The Japanese have already taken steel and automobiles from the United States. If they win this one, they'll knock us back into the Stone Age. So we Americans have a tremendous stake in seeing that doesn't happen.
And what about the United Kingdom? Will we get a look in?
The UK can play a tremendous part, and there are initial stirrings already. Most people know that the Department of Industry, under the initiative of the Minister of Information Technology, set up the ALVI Committee. They've recommended the spending over an 8-year period or so of very large sums of money in the hundreds of millions. Given that that could be put in the hands of the scientists who are actually going to do the job, and means taken to bring some of our lost exiles back from overseas, then we can do it. But so far, we've had a fine report, we've had many meetings, we've had a lot of talk, we've had no action. The funds are not yet reaching the people who have to do the work.
The picture for the future may be uncertain, but one thing can be guaranteed. Research will continue. If not here, then elsewhere. Economic aspects apart, we have to be sure that fifth-generation computers, super-intelligent machines, these quasi-human brains, as Professor Robert Jastrow calls them, are used in a humanitarian way. The specialists whose brains are picked to program expert systems are delighted to produce machines that are cleverer than they are. They feel a pride of authorship. But what about the rest of us, who, as Professor Weizenbaum said, have not been consulted? How will we feel? Over to Monte Carlo, where in 1979 Dr. Luigi Villa scaled the pinnacle of his gaming career by winning a glittering World Championship tournament. The game was backgammon. Far away in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, at Carnegie Mellon University, a computer program trained to learn backgammon had been devised by Dr. Hans Berliner. The day after Dr. Villa's World Championship match, he played against Berliner's computer program. The computer's moves were made by a robot. The computer thrashed the world champion 7 games to 1. What was Villa's reaction? Dr. Berliner won't easily forget it.
Well, I think he was extremely disappointed at having won the World Championship the previous day and now losing to a machine that he rather expected to beat rather easily. I told him I was sorry that it had happened, but because it was a nice day for me.
Never before has man had to share his planet with a competing intelligence. How can we assess the situation when it has no precedent? Professor Fredkin.
Now, when you put all of this into some kind of perspective, in some sort of universal terms, what we see is that I think of it as 3 great events in sort of history. One might be like the creation of the universe is obviously the biggest and most important event. The appearance of life, which is a almost magical organizing principle and is extremely diverse, as we see on this planet, is another major event. A third one, which I think is equal in importance, is the appearance of artificial intelligence, which is a kind of form of life that's very different, that has possibilities for intellectual achievement that are hard for us to imagine.
Our descendant will not be the child of the loin, but the child of the brains, the thing we call the computer, which does not have to pass through the birth canal and does not grow by a tablespoonful of gray matter every 100,000 years, which is the case in the rapid growth of our brain, but grows a factor of 10 in power every 7 years, the computer generation. There's no question but that it will match us in narrow reasoning power by 1990 and go beyond us to become the great new intelligent race of the future.
And the question is, where will that leave us? Well, we're not the only creature on this planet to be able to do physical things, and many other creatures can do some of the physical things better than us. We can't win a fight with the lion, for example. And on the intellectual area, once computers do that, better than we can, I think it'll have actually a very beneficial effect. Once the shock passes, the shock of knowing machines can do things better than we can, that beneficial effect will be that we will have a burden removed off of our back, which is the burden of being the sort of supreme intellectual creature on the planet. We have to worry about everything today that isn't worried about by God. And when computers come along, they'll be able to worry about a lot of big questions that we're basically incompetent to worry about. What this will mean is that we will, in some sense, finally find our niche where we fit in, and there'll be a limit on the bottom, which we already know, but there'll be a limit on the top. Rather than being, in some sense, a limitation to us humans, I believe that that kind of having a niche will allow us to finally fulfill our destiny as humans, because we will know what we are and we'll be able to go about doing it and having fun, as it were, without worrying about all of the too big issues that we're incompetent to handle.
Hello, Igor. Hello, Igor. Hello, Igor. Hello, Igor. Hello, Igor.
Down. Right. Right. Up. Right. 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 Up. 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 Up.
Men are all alike.
In what way?
They're always bugging us about something or other.
Can you think of a specific example?
Well, my boyfriend made me come here.
Your boyfriend made you come here.
He says I'm depressed much of the time.
I'm sorry to hear that you're depressed.
It's true. I am unhappy.
Do you think coming here will help you not to be unhappy?
Well, I need some help. That much seems certain.